Every morning for over 2 decades, Roberto Magno rose before the sun, his body conditioned by years of repetition and resolve. In Quezon City, where his modest home stood tucked between rows of low-rise apartments, he was a symbol of the working class, a man who had sacrificed his prime to build stability for his family. At 58, time had left its mark, gray streaks in his hair, aches in his joints, and a quiet wisdom in his eyes. Yet he remained steadfast. Certificates of excellence lined the hallway, echoes of a career built on precision, loyalty, and unwavering discipline. As a warehouse operations manager, he was more than an employee. He was the heartbeat of logistics, the human memory bank for every route, vendor, and crisis the company ever faced. But change was brewing. A new CEO had taken over, young, foreign-educated, fixated on innovation and youth-driven culture. Roberto noticed the subtle shifts. His opinions bypassed in meetings, his systems called outdated. He shrugged them off. Surely, decades of loyalty still meant something. Then came the abrupt invitation, an executive meeting. No explanation, just urgency. And in minutes, the job that had defined his life vanished behind cold jargon and a severance envelope. The dismissal came without emotion. The CEO, barely into his 30s, delivered it like a script. Keywords like restructuring, agility, and future ready flew past Roberto's ears. Next to him sat a silent HR representative, eyes fixed on a folder as if unable to meet his gaze. No mention of his tenure. No thank you for decades of sacrifice. Just a sterile goodbye and an offer of security escort. Roberto packed his things methodically, each item a symbol of his service. The photo of his daughter on her first day of school, a commemorative plaque from his 10th work anniversary, and a coffee mug with his name printed in fading ink. As he walked out past the floor he had trained and mentored, eyes met his with disbelief and sadness. Whispers followed. Some turned away, others mouthed quiet apologies. But Roberto kept walking, his pride still intact, for now. In the parking lot, the weight of reality settled in. He sat gripping the steering wheel, staring into nothing, numb. His wife found him there an hour later, frozen in place. He didn't speak. She didn't ask. She simply held him while the facade crumbled and tears finally emerged. At home, the silence was louder than the streets of Manila. Roberto avoided looking at the framed photos on the wall. Graduations, family outings, a wedding from years past. Each one a reminder of why he worked so hard. That evening, their daughter Maria called from her dorm in California, thrilled about passing her nursing finals. Roberto mustered a congratulatory tone, hiding the devastation in his voice. Later, his teenage son messaged about a school robotics trip, needing funds. Roberto stared at his dwindling bank account, the pressure in his chest becoming a familiar ache. He sent the money anyway. Days turned into weeks as he scoured job boards. Applications were submitted in batches. Interviews were granted, but always ended with polite rejections. Employers wanted youthful energy, digital adaptability, a long-term fit. One interviewer even asked if Roberto could handle fast-paced environments. Another said his resume was impressive for someone nearing retirement. The humiliation piled up like unread mail. His skills, once celebrated, were now dismissed as outdated. His savings bled away slowly, and the electricity bill sat unopened on the kitchen counter. a silent reminder of how quickly security can vanish. Desperation forced his hand. With no formal job offers and no clear path forward, Roberto signed up for Grab, the Philippines' rideshare platform. A former logistics executive now driving strangers through chaotic traffic for minimal fare. His first rider, a young man slurring his words, complained loudly about lazy old workers in his office. Roberto kept silent, swallowing the insult. At 2 a.m., he sat in a dark parking lot outside a 7-Eleven, slurping instant noodles and watching younger drivers laugh nearby, their energy a painful contrast to his exhaustion. Then came the moment that would define his spiral, a ride request to Makati, a corporate party. The passengers were his former colleagues, fresh off a celebration, perhaps a promotion. Drunk and boisterous, they fell into stunned silence upon recognizing him behind the wheel. One mumbled an apology as they exited. Roberto drove away wordless, face flushed with shame and fury. That night, alone in his car, he stared at his reflection in the rearview mirror, a face once respected, now just another shadow in a gig economy system. But from the depths of that humiliation, something ancient and powerful stirred within him. Defiance. Back at home, his family gathered around a simple dinner. His wife served his favorite adobo, her quiet strength anchoring the table. Their son excitedly shared details of a robotics project, and Maria appeared on video chat, tired but radiant. Roberto observed them, each voice a lifeline. In the backdrop of failure, this was what remained: his reason. It was then he noticed something during his night shifts. Patterns among the Grab drivers. At gas stations and loading zones, they'd gather, venting frustrations. No health care, no paid leave, heavy commission cuts. One had worked a double shift to buy his daughter's asthma meds. Another feared logging off because the app would punish him with fewer future rides. These weren't isolated complaints. They were systemic failures. Roberto, trained to solve logistical puzzles, started asking questions. How many drivers felt like this? What did they need? Could the system be rebuilt, not from the top down, but the bottom up? His instinct, long buried beneath shame, returned. One night, he cleared the dining table and began sketching models, calculations, and diagrams. His wife passed him coffee, her eyes lighting up at the return of the fire she thought corporate cruelty had extinguished. Night after night, Roberto devoured articles on cooperative models and driver-owned platforms across Asia and Latin America. He studied profit-sharing structures, platform coding, and governance systems. His notebooks became blueprints. He envisioned a transport cooperative that empowered drivers instead of exploiting them. Lower fees, real benefits, and democratic decision-making. It would start small, but scale with purpose. He called a meeting with 10 drivers at a local sari-sari store. No suits, no slide decks, just Roberto's notebook and voice, firm and driven. Some were skeptical, others curious. He spoke not as a dreamer, but as someone who'd lived the grind. He showed them the math, the potential, the dignity. One driver asked, "What if we fail?" Roberto replied, "What if we succeed?" That single answer sparked momentum. 10 drivers became 30. 30 turned to 70. Word of mouth moved faster than any algorithm. Maria donated part of her scholarship savings. His son contributed his part-time income. Roberto mortgaged their home. His wife, without hesitation, co-signed. This was no longer just survival, it was rebellion. And in a matter of months, it would become a movement. By month 3, the Cooperative launched. It wasn't polished. No sleek app, no flashy PR, but it was real. 150 drivers signed up, unified by hope and shared purpose. Roberto worked around the clock, answering customer service calls, uploading tutorials to train drivers, negotiating fuel discounts with local vendors, and onboarding small businesses for reliable logistics partnerships. Every task drew from the 25 years of operations wisdom they once told him was obsolete. Slowly, things clicked. The platform's transparency and fairness attracted more drivers. Word spread beyond Manila to nearby provinces. Roberto's story, whispered through driver circles, became legend. The man who was fired for being too old had created something no startup incubator ever imagined. Drivers now had voting power, a say in policies, and access to pooled health care. Their revenue tripled compared to what they earned through Grab. Roberto kept a photo taped to his laptop, himself in his car outside 7-Eleven, eating instant noodles. It reminded him where this all started, not with opportunity, but with humiliation. Now, that humiliation had turned into leadership. As the Cooperative flourished, an unexpected call came through. A voice from Roberto's past, confused, hesitant. It was the CEO. His once booming logistics firm was crumbling. The young disruptor he had hired after Roberto's exit had alienated suppliers and collapsed service levels. Delivery times had tripled. Vendors were jumping ship, and major contracts were being canceled. They were hemorrhaging money. The CEO, now stripped of his confidence, needed help. But not an employee. A partner. Roberto paused, emotion swirling. Here was the same man who had dismissed him without ceremony, now extending an olive branch under pressure. They agreed to meet. Roberto arrived at the office building where he was once escorted out. This time he wore a suit, flanked by 2 Cooperative board members. This time he was not returning as an employee. He was the head of a 500-strong logistics force with its own infrastructure, its own rules, and its own leverage.
The boardroom was tense. Executives looked anxious, some embarrassed. Roberto listened as they outlined their losses and begged for operational support. When they were done, he made his terms clear. The Cooperative would not simply save them, it would own 40% of their logistics division. In return, Roberto demanded long-term contracts for his Cooperative, minimum wages for all delivery workers, and the reinstatement of a pension plan for employees over 50, something the company had scrapped years ago. The executives balked, but Roberto remained unmoved. This was not revenge, it was restoration. The CEO hesitated, weighed the collapse of his empire against pride, and finally agreed. Hands were shaken, contracts signed. What was once a one-sided power dynamic had become a partnership. Roberto walked out of that meeting not as a former employee, but as a co-owner. Workers who had once pitied him now saw him as a symbol of everything the old system feared: experience, vision, and solidarity. 6 months later, the Cooperative had grown to 800 drivers. The joint venture brought new stability to the faltering logistics firm, but it also introduced new values: fairness, transparency, and efficiency born of lived experience. The old guard who once dismissed legacy systems now relied on the very man who built them. Roberto became an icon, but he remained grounded. His office was simple, his hours long. On the wall behind his desk, he hung that 7-Eleven photo as a reminder of resilience. Young drivers often sought his counsel. One, barely 24, came to him in tears, jobless, desperate, considering abandoning his career hopes entirely. Roberto sat him down and shared his story, not as a lecture, but as a lifeline. He told the young man that what others see as your limit may actually be your origin point. He handed him a cooperative application and said, "We don't just need drivers. We need believers." That driver would later become one of the cooperative's most effective team leaders. Roberto's home, once tense with anxiety, had transformed into a place of peace. Maria, now a licensed nurse, returned home on weekends with tales from the hospital. His son displayed a new robotics trophy, beaming with pride. At the dinner table, laughter returned, along with the smell of his wife's signature adobo. But more than food or accolades, what filled the home was a renewed sense of purpose. The family had endured uncertainty, sacrificed savings, and bet on an idea that could have failed but it didn't. Every night, as Roberto stood on their small balcony overlooking the lights of Quezon City, he thought of the hundreds of drivers who now returned to their own homes with dignity and income they could rely on. The cooperative had become more than a business. It was a refuge, a response to a system that once treated people as disposable. Now, they were owners. They were empowered. And for Roberto, it validated every sleepless night, every rejected job application, and every moment he sat in that car wondering what came next. The ripple effect of Roberto's initiative didn't stop at the cooperative. Local politicians took notice of the grassroots success, inviting him to speak at labor forums and public hearings. Small business owners reached out for advice on building ethical supply chains. Universities began offering case studies on the cooperative's model. And yet, Roberto always emphasized that this wasn't about him. It was about what happens when experience isn't discarded, but harnessed. When workers are treated as stakeholders. One surprising message came from a logistics association in Japan, requesting a virtual meeting. They had heard of a Filipino-led cooperative transforming urban transport. Roberto agreed, curious. The Japanese executive told him they were facing similar problems with aging workers being sidelined. Roberto offered insights, shared his documentation, and found common ground. A quiet partnership began sharing ideas, not contracts. Across borders, two nations, Philippines and Japan, found resonance in the idea that age is not a weakness, but a force of wisdom when given room to lead. The cooperative soon expanded outside Metro Manila, Iloilo, Cebu, and Davao began launching sister chapters. Young leaders emerged, some children of drivers, others fresh graduates disillusioned by corporate gatekeeping. Every chapter adapted the model to fit local needs, but the core remained: shared power, shared profit, shared respect. Roberto stepped back from daily operations, trusting the leadership he had mentored. He began focusing on policy work, pushing for laws that protected gig workers and encouraged cooperative entrepreneurship. When invited to speak at a labor summit in Tokyo, Roberto wore a traditional barong and spoke in clear, firm English. He recounted his journey not as a hero's tale, but as a cautionary one. He warned that sidelining experience in favor of youth alone was not innovation, it was waste. The Japanese audience applauded. Afterward, a professor from Kyoto approached him and said, "We don't need more apps. We need more people like you." That moment, quiet and sincere, affirmed the legacy Roberto was building. Roberto's former CEO eventually retired. Ironically, the cooperative turned partner became the stabilizing core of the company he once led. New leadership adopted more humane policies, even crediting the cooperative as their competitive advantage, but Roberto remained modest. Back in Quezon City, he still drank coffee at the same corner carinderia, chatting with drivers and clerks. His humility made him beloved. His leadership made him legendary. One day, a young man approached him, nervous. "Sir, I read about you. My father was one of your first members. He said you changed our lives." Roberto smiled and placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "No," he said. "We just reminded each other what we deserve." That was the secret to Roberto's impact. He never claimed to save anyone. He simply gave people back their voice. The cooperative wasn't just logistics. It was proof that reinvention was possible even at 58, even after rejection, even when the world told you your time was over. Today, Roberto Magno is 62. He no longer drives professionally, but his influence drives an entire movement. Across the Philippines and parts of Southeast Asia, cooperative transport models have taken root, inspired by one man's refusal to accept invisibility. His journey, from warehouse manager to rideshare driver to founder of a revolutionary transport cooperative, has become more than a redemption story. It's a blueprint. A blueprint for resilience, for worker empowerment, and for bridging generational divides between experience and innovation. In an age obsessed with disruption, Roberto proved that sometimes the most radical act is restoration, restoring dignity to labor, restoring value to those cast aside, restoring belief that every person, regardless of age, has something vital to contribute. His name is now cited in business schools, but to most, he's still just Roberto, the man who refused to disappear, the man who built something better. And in the eyes of every driver, he empowered every family, he uplifted, and every worker who thought they were finished. Roberto didn't just start a cooperative. He sparked a revolution.